Welcome, everybody. So tonight I'm joined by esteemed artists of the pen in alphabetical order. Kia Corthron, an award-winning playwright and novelist of a body of work that refuses to turn away from the real, the political, and everything in between, with her latest work being Moon and the Mars, a novel, which is an exploration of the relationship between Black and Irish communities within Five Points District in New York. Through Kia's lyricism, we travel to the period of 1857 to 1863 and are taken further into this moment through the main character, who is half Irish and half Black. Also with us is Farah Jasmine Griffin, an award-winning author with a body of work and who is currently the William B. Ransford Professor of English and Comparative Literature and African American Studies at Columbia University. She also serves as the program director for the Schomburg Center's Scholars in Residence program. Farah's latest work, Read Until You Understand, The Profound Wisdom of Black Life and Literature, takes us into the intimacy and depth of wisdom via Black literature in a way that weaves deeply personal with sharp insights about Black arts, the liberation of self, grace, and many things within the pages of this latest work. And Bernice McFadden, an award-winning novelist with a body of work whose two seminal books have been celebrating their anniversaries, with the recent 20th anniversary of Sugar and the 10th anniversary of Glorious, whose main character embodies two literary geniuses from the Harlem Renaissance, Nella Larson and Zora Neale Hurston. This work traversing the Jim Crow South, Harlem Renaissance, and Civil Rights era. Bernice's latest work, Praise Song for the Butterflies, takes us into a fictional West African country while immersing us within a very real cultural practice of trikosi, which is the act of families sending girls to shrines as slaves to serve priests to gain spiritual protection, a ritual servitude that takes place in different parts of the world. All of them having contributed to a range of anthologies. My very warm welcome to all of you.
Thank you.
So there's something that stands out within this combined awe-striking body of work, whether it is through your plays and novels, Kia, through the meditations on the Black creative lives that have shaped our now, Farah, or through your novels that illuminate history through the unforgettable characters, Bernice. The audience is invited to see the unseen while giving ourselves over to a much needed history and culture lessons that we never knew we were craving. I'm excited to talk to you all tonight, and given our time together, I want to focus on one question and treat this almost as a virtual porch in a dialogue that we're having together. I want to remind the audience that if you have questions, we'll get to those later. That will be opened in the Q&A. And I will definitely be sharing your questions with the panelists when it's time. So there's been talk about this moment being another renaissance for Black creativity, yet there are many of us still fighting for safety and for many different things on different fronts. So I'm curious about your perspective as scholars and as creatives. How do you see this phase of Black creativity versus what it has been in the past?
Farah?
Okay. I think that this phase is both builds upon earlier phases and is also distinct. And in some ways, you know, what you said, Shanta, about we're still fighting for safety. Those are often the times when our creative works have really come forth. You know, we often think about the Harlem Renaissance as being the primary period of Black creativity in the 20th century, but actually the 1890s, which is a period known as the nadir, you know, where we have disenfranchisement and we have racial violence and we have all kinds of things, a kind of backlash against against Reconstruction, the forward movement of Reconstruction. That was one of our most creative periods. It's a period that scholars call postbellum pre-Harlem. It's a period that gives us writings by Du Bois and novels by James Weldon Johnson and journalism by Ida B. Wells and Frances Ellen Watkins Harper and poetry by Dunbar. There's something about those moments where our creative talents step forward and bear witness to our humanity and our lives. And at the same time, when those rare occasions when it feels like the boot is off our neck, also are moments where we exhale and create work. So in that way, I think this moment is similar. It's certainly different because we've made certain kinds of advances, or perhaps the backlashes against the advances that we've made are especially striking because we had a Black president, and yet and still we find ourselves facing the very worst of times in terms of efforts to take away the vote and violence again. I think that we have a new kind of literary terrain that enables us to get work out there. The development of technology, the way that writers are taking advantage of developments in technology to get work out there to larger audiences, broader audiences, more international audiences. I think that is unique, and the quickness with which that can happen is certainly unique to this moment. I mean, we've always had a kind of transnational audience, but I think the quickness with which it is happening is also pretty unique to this moment.
I can jump in. Partly because I loved Farah's answer, and I thought I made myself disappear so I can't see my face, but now I see my big back face. So I guess it doesn't work that way technically. But I will look up at your little people up there because I like looking at your faces and not mine. I love the thing you said about the nadir. I've never heard of that before. And I am definitely going to research it as soon as I get off here. I actually was thinking that I would say this about theater, definitely in plays I've seen recently, and also in literature. What you were talking about, how all this artistic vision, this flow comes out of those most horrible times. But then you were saying it also comes out in other times. And I actually wonder if in those horrible times, the powers that be suddenly let those voices be heard, the voices that are going on all the time. Yeah, there's a lot of plays now, even in the last, say, 10 years, say, since there's been so much police violence, before George Floyd, in terms of citizen videographers who, with their cameras that what we've always known was going on is now the video proof, and which has been such a long time coming, because I feel like the first example of that was Rodney King, and with the most horrible display of brutality, police brutality, still they were all of the cops got off. So I think it's been a long time to coming to a place where there is some justice, which I always say in conflict with my prison abolition senses, but at least the sense that that there is in society, much of society, a realization of what's going on, who are those perpetrators. And I think part of not just guilt, so that can be part of it, but responsibility that the people that, you know, in power have are to allow voices to speak about those things in those times, and hope that the times get better, but the voices can continue to be heard.
I think this time is different for a few different reasons. We have Twitter, we have TikTok, we have Facebook, and all of these platforms have basically shrunk the world and made everything so much more accessible. So even if someone is unable to physically travel to another country, they can just click on YouTube, click on Twitter, you know, and connect and engage and interact with people from other countries. I think with that as well is that the more you know, the more you want to know. At least that is for me. I'm probably projecting. Also, I wanted to read something because this post has been circulating on the platforms over the past few weeks, and I think it speaks to the conversation we're having here. And it's a quote from Ishmael Reed, and he said, Bell Hooks said that white feminists told her that in order to succeed, she had to write for them. As a result of tokenism, generations of Black writers who write as well or better than, or better, have been obscured. It's all political. I think that we've come to the end of that road. I think Black writers, at least what I've been seeing, they're writing exactly what they want to write. They are completely disregarding, ignoring, blocking out the white gaze, refusing to put in that one redeemable white character into their stories, even though that character really doesn't fit. In order, you know, previously many writers did that in order to find footing in publishing. And I think the veil has been removed, and you know, the lid is off the pot. It can't, like, everything is, the cork is out of the bottle. You can't you can't recork it. It's out. And I listen to these new writers, how they speak. They're not code switching. They refuse to do it. They're speaking their nation language, and it's a beautiful thing to watch these writers completely embrace who they are, where they come from. And I think so many new windows and new doors have been opened for the next generation of writers. So I don't think there's any turning back. That's what makes it different.
That's so interesting what each of you said in terms of talking about, you know, what's different in terms of the technology, the accessibility, and all these different things. But then alongside of that, there is still this soup of respectability politics. There's, you know, there's some of us who still remember or carry the idea of, well, are we responsible for a whole group? And then navigating everything from like white gaze to Christian gaze and seeing for our work and creating. And so with that, my question for each of you is, what is there a piece of advice that you wish someone told you about how to navigate all these things, even though it feels like the veil is lifting now as you were starting? So each of you have this wondrous body of work that you just, it's out in the world. What do you wish someone told each of you about carving that creative path, especially within the soup of intersectionality?
I don't know. I've always felt fortunate that I started writing kind of in the wake of a generation of Black women writers like Morrison, like Toni Cade, like, you know, Alice Walker and Tozaki. I felt that in some ways, and then the critical, you know, the critical writers, Hortense Spillers and Thaddeus Davis and all of those people, that in some ways I felt like they paved a ground and gave me a kind of permission that I was very grateful for, and that maybe it was permission that they didn't have, but they just took the risk anyway, you know. Having said that, I think for me, the difficulty was trying to write as an academic and a scholar, but also knowing that I had this other voice that was always there, and trying to figure out a way to adhere to what would get me a listening from critics and scholars, but what I knew was my own voice. And I think that was more the struggle. And I think that what I would say to my younger self is, you know, I would have felt much more comfortable writing fully in my own voice much earlier than I did. That's what I think I would have done. Yeah, that's the advice I would have given her. That, you know.
Kia, you're muted, Kia.
You couldn't read my lips. But, again, what Farah said, I second once again, in terms of coming into writing at a time where a lot of Black women had already paved the way, and being very fortunate for that. You know, it's interesting because as a Black writer, I was a playwright many years. Novel writing is more recent for me. And I think I was fortunate to get produced a lot. I wrote about many various different political struggles. And almost always, there was an instance, sometimes I would write short plays for, what was it? One time it had to do with Iraqis suffering under US sanctions. So in that case, there weren't necessarily Black people, it was short pieces, because that was what the project was. But for the most part, in terms of my full length plays, there were always Black people at the center. Sometimes people will be surprised because they weren't always necessarily Black issues, even though they were always political. So I wrote a play about landmines, for example, and the entire cast is Black. And I think sometimes that surprised people because they expected a Black writer to be political, and that was okay, but only in Black issues. That an issue like landmines is colorless and therefore white, like neutral is white. So, but I think again, it was nothing. I mean, I just sort of went and did what made sense to me, and might have been surprised or not when people were surprised, but yeah, I guess it wasn't a matter of knowing. I just sort of went in and did it, and then just saw, you know, whatever mistakes I would make. I will say one thing though, really quickly, because I'm actually staring at my novel as I say this. I will say one thing because I'm here. I actually came to Vermont. I'm here with my friend Joe and Jennifer Mazer, and because I was going to come to Vermont anyway, so I came up to see the trees, right? And so we were talking a little earlier about the fact that both my two books are quite long, and And one thing I didn't know, because I didn't know anything about novels, is that sometimes it's hard to sell a big book. But I will say, now that I'm sort of thinking about this, and I'm glad I didn't know that, because they should have been long books, you know. But it was interesting because with my first book, there were some people that said, there were a lot of people that said, oh, it's hard to sell a big book. And then other people said, oh, it's hard to, especially a debut novel. Other people said it is hard to sell a big debut novel and not be a white man. So, so that may be changing, but that was in the last 5 years that I would hear from many literary people. It was an interesting comment. And then I did sort of realize, oh, there were a few big books, and it seemed like that as debuts, and it seemed, anyway, I don't know if that was off the question, but it sort of came to my mind. And I'm glad there was no one to tell me not to do it, because I did the wrong thing, which was the right thing for those books. So
I've been sitting here scouring my mind, and I don't think I have an answer. And it may just be, I'm processing really slowly. It might come up later towards the end, and I'll pop up and go, oh, I now have a response. So I'm going to skip that one.
I love you all are throwing me some challenges. This is good. This is really good. And Kia, that did answer the question, actually, like the whole idea of going against industry norms. And actually that brings up a question that that just pops up right now. Speaking of industry, there was the whole few years ago hashtag publishing paid me. And so there is the level of, you know, one writing and feeling like they have access to the tools to write and project out anything they want because of Twitter, TikTok, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But then there's still butting up against agents and editors. And how have any of you encountered that, and what was that like, and how and navigating that, how did you protect yourselves and your work?
I encountered
like navigating the industry, and like in terms of working with publishers and editors, and some of the challenges that may pop up from that, and the ways that some of the conversations have surfaced over the past several years. And then how did you protect yourself in your work from some of those demands and minefields?
Oh, okay. Well, I have a funny, and it's not even my personal story, but whenever this question comes up, this is the story that pops into my head. And I think, you know, as Black writers, writing and publishing with majority white run publishing houses, we run into issues that, you know, culturally we're very different. And so if I write something a certain way and the editor comes back and they've corrected it, I'm like, no, this is how it's supposed to be said. So Terry McMillan shared this story with me. I think it was Disappearing Acts, and her character was a trust fund baby. And so the editor came back and said, oh, you need to change this. And Terry said, why? And she said, because Black people aren't trust fund babies. So that's an issue. That's an issue that I think a lot of writers run into, because we're working with a lot of the times, you know, very young white women who, they don't live in our world. We live in their world, right? So they don't live in our world. One more example, I think I have. Did it leave me? It'll come back. I'm sorry, Chad. I'm just like, my mind is gone today. But that's one. That's one.
Thank you. Kia or Farah, you want to go?
Oh, I'm very good about bouncing off something else, because what Bernice said made me think, I feel like that's so historical that happens, like, especially because I've been living in the 19th century with this, my latest book, Moon and the Mars. So like oh my God, Linda Brent, narrative that I'm going completely blank.
It's not just me.
Incidents in the
What
life
is
of
it?
a
Incidents in
Yes.
the Life of a Slave Girl. Yes. Which, back then people didn't want to believe that she could write so well. Sojourner Truth, wasn't the speech, "Aren't I a woman?" And then the white abolitionists changed it to "Ain't I a woman?" I think that's true, because they didn't think a Black woman would say, "Aren't I a woman?" Right? So yeah, that is so historic. And I will say, in my publishing experience, because it's been very brief, only two, the same publisher, Seven Stories Press, and they all of the who have done awful things rejected it because it was too long, my manuscript, right? So with Seven Stories Press, actually my editor is a person of color, Veronica Liu, who's Chinese Canadian. And I didn't have any problems with them. I will say really quickly though, one time I did a play at American Theater. It was published in American Theater Magazine, which is kind of the big industry magazine. And it was called Breath Boom. It's about girl gangs in the Bronx, which was my most widely produced play. And the editor, who was some new person, they said, and apologized, but she changed it. This was dialogue to proper English, right? It was like, the Bronx. And I was like so mad. I was like, change it back. They were so apologetic, but somehow now they couldn't change it back. So I had to go in and re-edit the whole thing to get it back to the original play. But yeah, I can't even remember the original question, but that's
it.
Me to say all that.
You got it. Farah.
Well, no, I was just absolutely totally got it. Like both of those answers were so perfect, And I think just going back to where you started, Shanta, with people saying, this is what publishing paid me. Like what really made you really see how bad it was when the white authors were willing to say, this is what I got paid. Right? Like it was, because before that, it's like some secret club. Like we think we kind of know that people aren't getting paid what they should be getting paid. Like, but we don't really know. And it was when those other authors came forward and said, wait a minute, this is what I got, that you said, then, you realize, oh, it's not just me. Like this is real. This is systemic and it's racial. And that's what I found so fascinating about that. And the willingness, which is something we don't do in this society, right? The willingness to come out and say, because it's as if if you got paid too little, that was some estimation of your value and your worth. And that's where it fits in with the question that you said, is how do you value yourself and how do you take care of yourself so that what people are paying you isn't an estimation of your value and your worth, right? And so we had these great writers like Kiese Lehman and, Jessamine Ward coming out saying, this is what I got paid. And we were all like, what? Right? And then you had white writers who often don't want to come out and be, I have benefited from how unjust this system is. And they were willing to do that. So it was a rare and extraordinary and important moment that just put it all on the page. I was really grateful for it, even though I was in shock every time I saw those numbers.
And I just imagine people in publishing just freaking out. Like, it's out there, what are we gonna do? you're gonna have to run me my money. That's what you have to do.
No, it's true. As I saw that, and I was like poring over the spreadsheet and looking at Roxane Gay. There's a article, and I'm just like, every time I had that scream mask face from that horror movie, like just jaw drop. My jaw couldn't drop long enough as I was thinking, whoa, right? And it, so to switch to another topic, and then I would love to see if the audience has any questions or if any of you have questions for each other. Because I always think it's interesting when the panelists get to talk amongst each other. Are there new territories you would like to explore? Is there anything in your work that you've not yet, like uncharted, that you're about to venture down or you would like to explore?
Well, I've already explored it. It'll be out November 11th.
Okay.
Plugs. I think that, you know, it in this industry, we are expected, for the most part, just to write about people who look like us, right? When everybody else, you know, white people get to write about everybody, and we are only expected to write about us. But I have, like, I have a global, I live in a global community. I know a lot of different people. They affect me. And I have stories in my head filled with those people, and those people look nothing like me. And I want the freedom and opportunity to be able to write those stories and have those stories published and have those stories be, you know, read by people of all colors. So that is where I'm headed. It's not going to happen that often, but this is a story that had been sitting on my heart for a very long time. And so that is my uncharted territory story.
I have a question, which is what's Bernice's book? Because
Me too.
mystery, but didn't tell us the
Oh,
answer.
I'm sorry. I'm sorry. It's actually, it's called Tisoy, Tisoy, and it's an Audible original. So it's coming out on November 11th.
Looking forward to that.
Thank you.
Thank you. Because I was afraid, I was like, okay, she's not going to tell us. Maybe it's like a secret. Kia or Farah, did you want to go next in terms of uncharted territories for your work?
Yeah, I think that for me, it's probably just continuing, you know, on the one hand, continuing to write nonfiction in the way that I've been doing it, but being creative with the form, which is what I've tried to do. And maybe, you know, I'm thinking of a project now that I am starting, but it's not, you know, it's not coming out on November 11th. But I think of it as nonfiction short stories. So they're based in nonfiction, but they're built like short stories are. And so that's what I'm going to be playing around with, and hopefully we'll see where it leads.
Like the nonfiction novel.
Yes,
right?
exactly.
I love that. I love that.
I love that too. Oh my God. Slay it. That's awesome. Kia.
I mean, for me, it became a new thing when I started novel writing after all those years playwriting. And I mean, I felt this way with my plays, and I feel this way with my novels, and I hope I continue to grow as a writer. But it's basically never to get into a rut, that every project is something very new, and which is not to say that it's necessarily better than the last thing. It may not be, but at least it's an adventure to be something very new in my writing.
Are there questions that you have for each other?
I have a question for Kia, and I know I'll have a question for Bernice because I just love her work so much. I'm always thinking about it. So Kia, I'm curious about, coming to the novel as a playwright, and what was, most sort of different for you? Did it present a kind of new sense of adventure or a risk, or what's the relationship between Kia the playwright and Kia the novelist?
Yeah, I went to school for playwriting, but not for novels. So it was completely a new adventure. And I was at a residency, and I realized I kept putting it off, and I didn't realize because I would always have a play to do. And then I finally realized, oh, I'm terrified, because I was like, ready at the residency. Then it was like, oh my God, I don't know how to write a novel. But what it really came about is I had an idea that was longer than like a 2-hour evening. I didn't know it was going to be as long as that novel got, which was very, very long. But you know what? It just became just like a play, which is, with a play, you take every scene at a time. And with the novel, I took every chapter, every little scene within the chapter at a time. And I mean, there's differences, but I found more similarities than differences. I remember one time with my first novel, I ran into a director, a friend of mine at the theater, and he said that he was about 20 pages short of finishing my first novel, which he had read entirely out loud. Like, he just liked, as a director, I think he liked the sound of it. And so he just did that. And he was saying that he felt that he was really enjoying it, and he could see it was written by a playwright. And I said, oh, you mean the dialogue? Because, playwrights, if we can do one thing, we can do dialogue, right? And he said, yeah, but it's also that throwing action, climax, denouement. Only when he said that, I realized that not every book has that. So I brought in the interior, aspect of being inside the character with the novel, but also it does have that structural story. So, so I still like my drama.
I wanted to ask Farah, and this is a little bit like off the road, a little bit off the path, but because I know where you live now, I want to know if you feel like you can create just as easily elsewhere as you do in the place that you live now, in the community that you live now.
Oh, wow, that's a great question.
Because Jamaica is in the line, right? Is it Jamaica?
No, I'm straight up Philly, Georgia to Philly. Georgia to Philly. Yeah.
Somebody else.
But that's a great question. I think that I actually think that I can, I'll say it this way. I think that I can write anywhere in some ways because I have to, because if I don't, I'll lose my mind. But I think that I write differently in different places. And so that, things come to me differently here. And sometimes I have to, I live in New York. And I get a ton of inspiration here, but I don't hear myself think very well here. So sometimes I have to leave to hear myself think, and then come back and, I can write. But I think I'm writing everywhere, but in a different way, in different places. Yeah. So I have a question for you, Bernice.
Yes.
So this is a question really about, I think, and this is, I haven't done the research. I don't know, I haven't done any surveys, but I feel like you probably have one of the most loyal readerships. I feel like you have ride or die readers. like readers that understandably love your work. And I just feel like there's a loyalty. And I wondered if you feel that, since that's me looking from outside and listening and talking to people. But I wonder if you feel that too.
Recently, I would say yes, over the past 2 years. I noticed it on Instagram first with the Instagrammers, and I was like, how they know me? Like, like it was, we do this, right? We do this thing, and it's my life, but when I'm not doing it, I'm just, cooking breakfast, taking care of like just regular living. So when all of a sudden there was like all of this activity on Instagram about my books, I was really stunned. I was like, oh, it made me feel good. And I'm happy to have them. Yeah, it's a nice feeling. And it's also weird, you know why? Because we all have the writer, the singer, whoever. Like, you don't have to know anything about what's coming. You just know it's coming and you're going to pre-order. I don't need to know anything else. And so to have people say that about me, I'm like, really? Oh, that's so nice.
That is special. Ride or die audience. That's special. That's awesome.
Yeah.
So we have a few more minutes. I'm definitely, for everybody who is here and joining us, make sure to put your questions in Q&A so that I can get them to our lovely panelists. Tell me, and this is kind of a little bit, I'm gonna follow Bernice off the beaten path a little bit. 1 or 2 things that you're really crazed over right now or obsessed about, or that's bringing you joy.
I can say, but it'll sound kind of goofy. I actually do some, I'm in committees to do awards for theater and things like that. So in regular life, I could be going to the theater practically every night, like many nights a week. And like a year and a half ago, everything stopped, right? So I didn't have any time. Like, I didn't watch TV, or I didn't watch movies and TV. I didn't do anything. And as it is, I just have my computer, right? Suddenly over the last year, I've discovered TV. And so there are actually, I will say 2 shows. Well, I would say 3 of indulgences, I would say. One is a new show. And I also have friends who I'm on their accounts. So I have all this free TV and I'm not paying for it, right? So like I have HBO, Showtime, I have all this stuff, right? I don't pay anything, right? Somehow I feel like the HBO cops are going to come and get me now that I said that in public, but there's a show called Reservation Dogs, right? It took to the 21st year of the 21st century to finally have a show about Native Americans, right? It's amazing. It's absolutely brilliant. The whole writing room, my sister actually writes TV, and she said the whole room, the writing room is all Native. Amazing, amazing show. There was another show on Showtime called Work in Progress. I think it's the best thing on TV. I have the main character, what's her name, is like Abby something, who is a white middle-aged lesbian who plays a white middle-aged lesbian named Abby something. I mean, the first season, we're in the second season now. Like, I've never seen so much about generational queer culture, about how a lesbian of a certain age and, younger people and that fluidity. I mean, just so interesting. And I have to say, the episode I just watched in the second season, well, it goes into COVID, it goes into the current time. And I've actually never seen something on this show and anywhere in TV that goes so truthfully about this time, this post George Floyd time. The episode is called FTP, Fuck the Police. It's like, it really goes into it. So that's amazing. The third one, which is, and this is my last one, I'll stop talking about TV. This French series out of Paris called Call My Agent. It's so much fun. Do you know that show? It's about these movie agents in French, and every episode is a real star is featured on it, playing themselves as a movie star. Most of them are French stars, but in the last season, there was one, Sigourney Weaver went to Paris. So anyway, I just realized there are probably other things, more political things to my heart that give me joy, but somehow in that moment, I went totally to TV. So I will stop now.
Well, okay, so the political things that are happening don't bring me joy. They bring me much distress, but not the same kind of distress that I was in before 2020, which was just every day crazy. But now it's like, really, we're not going to do anything. Like, I'm sort of driven insane by the fact that things that I had hoped would be happening are not happening at the level of electoral politics. So that drives me crazy. Things that bring me joy right now, we are in a moment of like just amazing literary production. And, I pick up I read Gail Jones' new novel. And then after that, I read Wole Soyinka's new novel. And I've got Honoré Fanon Jeffers, waiting. And then I've got something else. And then there's a old Richard Wright that they just found, and I'm picking that up, and I'm trying to read like 3-4 books at the same time. And there are all these, autobiographies and novels. And I think Rita Dove has a collection coming out. And so that brings me joy. Like I think that feels joyous. The fact that, my family is here through the struggles of COVID, that is not so much joy, but just a kind of almost an exhale, not quite, because we're not out of it yet, but almost an exhale. So you asked about like obsession, drive me mad, joy, drive me mad, politics, joy, sort of reading and what I could be reading. And then there's a lot of good theater. So I want to see some of that, although I haven't gone into the theaters yet, but I'm going to do that. And just a kind of a level of contentment that I hadn't quite had because of the anxiety of the COVID time.
What brings me joy is planning my next vacation. That's what I love to travel. That's where my joy is. And whenever things start feeling a little tight, claustrophobic, I start planning to jump. So that brings me a lot of joy. It makes me happy to have something to look forward to.
Where are you plotting to go, Bernice? You keep leaving us in the dark with mystery.
Maldives.
Okay.
I follow Bernice on every social media that she's on and live vicariously.
Oh,
like, where is she?
Fingers crossed. Hopefully.
Where is she now? Where was she last week?
I love it. So we do have a question, and Kia, I'm with you on the TV. I go deep into TV. I love me some TV. So that's all I'm gonna say. Love TV, right? TV, Viva la TV, right? So, oops, let me turn that off. So, okay, I have a question from Q&A. How would you envision an ideal creative environment for writers of color? And that's for each of you. Bernice, you're muted.
I was actually speaking to myself.
Oh, no. They caught you?
I mean, ideal, but I'll try. An ideal creative environment for writers of color. would be, for me, would be something by the ocean, palm trees, warm weather, and music and wine and great food and Black writers.
Okay, Farah or Kia, ideal creative environment.
I mean, what Bernice said, actually, I love traveling too. And I love, this is also related to something Farah said about finding quiet places. Something it's hard in the city because I also live in New York. And, or Farah, you say you live in, no, you do live in New York, right? Or did you say, yes. And I love going on writers' residencies. I love the quiet. I've done international ones, and then I also have some time to explore. And I also even have found there are places like, because I don't mind writing outside. There are gardens and parks and things I found around the city that even a place I go to, Farah's gonna think I'm crazy to make this long trip, but there are like these gardens over on Staten Island, and I love like just taking the peaceful ferry over there, and yeah, it can sort of make your own retreat sometimes.
Yeah, my answer would be really quick. I mean, I'll go to Bernice's retreat. I think it's hard to kind of answer that question because I think it would be what each writer needs, you know, and some writers need the mountains and some of them need the city, you know, and so I think mostly what I would think of is resources, resources to be able to breathe and write and feel safe doing so, whatever that, you know, setting might be.
I'm saying thank you to all of you, and I'm muted. So here is a question from the audience, and this is for Farah. I believe you said your family migrated from Georgia to Philly. If I'm wrong, you can ignore the rest of this. I have my own interests in Germantown because my white mother was German, was born there. I've learned that Germantown is one location where African Americans migrated to from the South. Do you ever write of history of Germantown, both earlier and later history?
Okay, that's a great question. So yeah, my family did, both paternal and maternal grandparents migrated from Georgia, different parts of Georgia, to Philadelphia. The earliest migrants, you know, that first great migration, which my grandparents were part of, they actually migrated to South Philadelphia and then branched out into other parts of the city. The second great migration, many people went to North Philadelphia. But Germantown always had a Black community. I've not done history of Germantown, but I write about Germantown in my most recent book, Read Until You Understand, because I have family who lived in Germantown. But for us, going to Germantown from South Philly was like a country day trip because there were trees and all of that. But there's been a longstanding historic Black community in Germantown, and a novel, 12 Tribes of Caddy by Ayanna Mathis, a beautiful novel, actually is set in Germantown, parts of it. And one of the characters is a migrant from the South who goes to Germantown. But that's a novel, but worth reading by far, absolutely.
Farah, you know, my maternal family migrated from Georgia to Germantown.
Really?
Yeah, and I talk about it, and I wrote about it in Nowhere is a Place. My great grandmother, Lily, whom I'm named after, yeah, she lived there.
There you go. So you got to read Bernice too. Ask that question.
But
Read
let me
that.
ask you, what part of Georgia?
So I don't know where my paternal grandparents were from, but my mother's people were from, her mother was from Eastman, which is in the middle of the state. It's Dodge County, Georgia.
Okay.
And then her father was from the coast.
Oh,
yeah. Mm-hmm. Sea Island, near the Sea Islands. Yeah.
I have my maternal family, Georgia. I could go to Vidalia, which is a dot, and there's a graveyard and like scattered family like Georgia, and they did make the migration up north. So yeah.
Georgia girls.
Georgia. Yeah.
Georgia.
So are there more questions from the audience or any thoughts or questions that you still have for each other? You all weren't playing. Y'all were just like so efficient with the answers. And just
I have a question for you.
me.
Yes.
Okay.
Tell us about how you decided to organize the panel. What made you, what need were you addressing? What made you think of it and come up with it? It's such a great idea to have us all here together.
Oh my God. So I cannot take credit for this panel, even though I will say, I think I did mention when we were talking maybe a month and a half ago, I was trying so hard not to fangirl all of you and be like, right. And so Stephanie Green approached me and said, would you like to moderate this panel? And I said, yes, without hesitation. I'm also a writer, I'm a poet. And it was sort of like, oh my goodness, this is my moment to like really download their brains and their knowledge and their wisdom and dig deeper into the work that you all have. And as I was thinking more about the questions, I dug back. I'm also a photographer. So I dug back into thinking about an internship I had when I was like too young to really realize what I had. Wadsworth Atheneum, and coming in contact with the Black arts movement and learning about that, but also other ways of learning about like all these different Black movements and Black creativity. I too didn't know about the like I knew some things, but like the actual name for it, the Nadir, the 1890s. And I'm like, oh, wow. Because I've been saying, oh, there are like 3 phases. And I started from the Harlem Renaissance. And I personally kept thinking, okay, if I'm outside of myself and I was in the audience, what would I really want to know? And how do we think about the time then, time current, and time going forward, especially because I'm working to be considered as a part of that whole creative legacy, right? And so I looked at the questions. I think I forget who said it, but it was just like, oh, these questions are hard. I said, yes, this is good. In terms of really stepping out of oneself and thinking about the creative process and selfishly, what is it that I would love to come away with, because I've been writing all my life, but not recently actually putting it out, so that's my answer to, and we do have, okay, here are a couple of other questions. So here's a question. Do panelists feel a burden to educate white people? That question went there for sure.
I get paid to educate white people.
Okay.
I mean, I teach at Tulane University. The majority of my students are white. Outside of that, though, no.
Yeah, I would say most of my students are white too. Not all, but most. And no, I don't feel that way. I feel that I hope that whatever I write, anyone who picks up the book will learn something they didn't know before. And that will be true of a white reader, and that will be true of some Black readers and Asian readers. And I hope that I have something to offer any reader who decides to read, but I don't sit down and say, I'm writing this to educate this group of people.
Farah took the words right out of my mouth.
I have another question. What was the first great African-American work of literature that blew each of you away?
Okay, so, and I love telling this story. I went to an all mostly white boarding school. And then prior to that, like I was aware of Black writers, but I thought they were all dead. okay? Because in school, I do not remember, in public school, I don't remember ever reading a Black author. And so, and at that time, I had aspirations. I wanted to write. I was a huge reader. And I came home from high school in 1983, and The Color Purple. The Color Purple was like everywhere. My mother had a battered copy, and I read it in one afternoon, and it blew me away because, first of all, I was like, I know all those people. That's my family. And secondly, a Black woman wrote this book and she's still alive. And thirdly, I was like, oh, I can absolutely write a book as a Black woman. And so, yeah, that was the first Black book that blew me away.
The first book, I think nobody would be surprised, would be Sula, which I read when I was about 13. That one was the first one to just like knock the wind out of me. And I'm like, what just happened? You know? And before that, strangely enough, not strangely enough, but interestingly enough, it was a short story in the collection, The Black Woman by Toni Cade. And that book has like all this poetry and fiction by like Paul Marshall and poetry by Audre Lorde. And it was a short story. Oh, and Shirley Ann Williams. There's a short story by Shirley Ann Williams. But it was a short story by Alice Walker called Diary of an African Nun, which is not one of her well-known short stories. But it just was, you know, like Bernie, I was like, a Black woman? Like, you know, and then that made me look for Black women, you know. A Black woman, like, and is an African nun, like, you know, like those, like an African and a nun.
For me, actually, like Bernice, I grew up in a small town in Maryland called Cumberland, Maryland. So it was a valley of the Appalachians. I could walk to West Virginia. It's like a 10-minute walk from my house. So it was very white, working class. And so no, there was no Black literature at all when I grew up. I might be the same thing with Bernice. It might have been The Color Purple. Although when you asked that question, the first thing that came to my mind was Go Tell It on the Mountain, which something I think that Farrah said. I think I went back to we were talking about The Quiet Place again, because he had to, it was like Switzerland, right? This little, in the middle of nowhere with all these white children following the Black man to his little cabin in the snow. He made his own retreat, and he had to leave to be able to look back and write on his growing up in Harlem. So yeah, it might have been The Color Purple, might have been the first one, but that's what came to my mind first was Go Tell on the Mountain.
That's a good question. So there's another sort of part statement, part question, where the person says, these writers are also seasoned and firm in who they are and in their work. Do they feel that way? So do each of you feel like, do you feel firm and grounded in your work and what?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yes.
I feel firm and grounded, and but I also feel like everything is new. So, like each time I do it, it's new, and so it feels like, can I do this? You know, what am I doing? So in that sense, I like that part of it. Like, you know, it feels like a chance to grow each time. But I certainly feel like it's doable. Like this is what I should be doing. But, yeah.
My first impulse was to say, yes, I do feel that way, but that's because I'm between projects and not in a project where I'm like, so for this novel, because it's a little girl that's half Black and half Irish, and I was doing both families because I really wanted to deal with those relationships between Black and Irish at that time. And I grew up in a very African-American culture. And so that was foreign to me. And the middle of the 19th century is foreign to me. So I was doing so much research so long before I felt brave enough to even start to write. And I finally had to, tell myself that you have to start writing this really terribly so the 10th draft you go through will be good. So I finally started doing that. So and now I feel really great about it. But
Thank you. Were there any other questions from the audience or that you have for each other? I want to thank you, all three of you, just for everything that you put into the world, and just for being here tonight and for being a part of here it is. Okay. Here's a question. The question is, I wonder if the panelists would be willing to talk about the role that trauma and oppression has played in their work. So we'll wrap with that.
I want to say, I'm going to give a really quick answer to that, but I just want to say and acknowledge that Tina McElroy Ansa is in the audience. And yeah, and she's when I started reading like Black women writers voraciously, she was one of those authors that I read, and I said I just want to publicly thank her for her work.
We all bow down.
Yes.
Ditto.
I write from oftentimes, not always, but I write from a place of trauma, and I'm always investigating it and trying to, peel it apart and then piece it back together. And so a lot of my work comes out of my trauma, and I'm interested in the oppression, not that my personal oppression, but the oppression of my ancestors, and how that affected their lives, and how then that affected my life in the long run. So yeah, that's where I hope that answers the question.
Thank you.
Yeah, I would say my most recent book, sort of a long time genesis of it, is a personal trauma. And then having spent a lifetime trying to connect that personal trauma to a history of oppression, but also wanting to illuminate the responses to that oppression and to that trauma, which were very healing and beautiful, and not always, but sometimes beautiful, and created something beautiful. And even, making sure I sort of acknowledge moments of joy too.
I second that in a way. I would definitely. So I always write. I would never say I put it that way, that I write about trauma. What I say is I always write social justice. Well, that's trauma. So, but I'll just say really quickly, coming from theater, there is a book by Augusto Boal called Theater of the Oppressed, which has all over the world, traumatized societies have used this in order to speak to their own communities. So I read that decades ago, but the one thing that really stayed with me was that he said, if you end, he's talking about theater, the same thing with a novel, if you end in such a way that all the audience can do when it's over is throw up their hands in despair, then that's what they'll do. But if there's even the sliver of hope, and not a fake Hollywood ending, but, true, the resilience of the human spirit, finding that, which is absolutely a truth, maybe someone in your audience will leave this and want to do something. And so I've always tried to find, even in the trauma, to try to find that truth.
Thank you. Again, thank you all. And if all of you were up here, I'd be like, hey, I need you to sign my book. But Kia, since you made it known you're in Vermont,
I'll be seeing ya.
I will be seeing you behind the scenes. I need my book signed, please. So like, please. All of you, I am humbled, and Tina being in the audience, humbled. Thank you all for just being a part of this conversation. And this is just, yeah, like I said, this could be its own conference. I would like to see it as its own conference. That'd be awesome. Thank you so much. Thank you for
Shanta.
joining
Thank
us.
you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. It was a pleasure. I was honored to be here with these two phenomenal women.
It was just wonderful. It was wonderful. Thank you.
Yes, thank
you.
all three of you. Thank you so much.
Thank you. And I was equally humbled, so I appreciate it. And thank you for joining us at the Brattleboro Lit Festival. And I hope you enjoy other sessions, and I hope to catch other things that you may be doing as well throughout this weekend.
Bye.
Bye.
Stay safe. Stay safe.
Thank you. Well,
Bye.